I held his head affectionately and quickly brought him closer to the package. His touch was firm but gentle. With each stroke, electricity would run from that point to my hair. After the vague sounds coming out of my mouth, he must have realized that he was doing something right, because he started to speed up. I started squeezing the pillow as if I was taking my revenge. The intensity of this feeling increased even more and finally turned into a big scream. I was shaking and Elias got up quickly with the water spilling from the package. "Oh, hi. You should definitely listen to this story. I'm sure it'll be the best story you've ever heard. Let me start over. My name's Rose, and I guess you could say life hasn't exactly been the whirlwind of excitement I once dreamed of. At 50, I've spent years in a marriage that feels more like a carefully choreographed dance than a passionate embrace. Don't get me wrong, I love Richard, my husband. But our life together has settled into such a predictable routine that sometimes it feels like I'm living the same day over and over again. Richard's a good man, steady, reliable, but oh so quiet. It's like he's been swallowed up by the routine too. We live in a quaint little neighborhood where everyone waves at each other and the biggest drama is whose lawn gets the Best Kept Yard award. A far cry from the life of adventure I once pictured for myself. Next door, a new family moved in about a year ago, the Thompson. Young, vibrant, always bustling with energy. Their son, Lucas, had just turned 18 this summer, and I couldn't help but notice him, tall, handsome, with this effortless charm. He'd always smile when we crossed paths, his eyes holding a spark of curiosity. At first, I dismissed it. What could a boy like him possibly see in someone like me? But then came that afternoon. I was sitting in the garden, sipping iced tea, watching the bees flit between my flowers. Richard was in his study, as usual, immersed in his books. The sun was warm, the kind of warmth that feels like a soft blanket, and I didn't notice Lucas until he was standing at the fence, offering me a lopsided grin. He said something about how beautiful the garden looked, and before I knew it, we were talking. About flowers, about his dreams of becoming an artist, about how much he hated math. His words were simple, but the way he spoke made me feel seen. Like he wasn't just being polite but genuinely interested in what I had to say. From then on, it became our thing, these little chats by the fence. And slowly, those conversations became my escape. I started looking forward to them more than I cared to admit. It wasn't just his youth or his looks, though those certainly didn't hurt. It was the way he made me feel alive, reminding me of a version of myself I thought I'd lost somewhere along the way. He had this raw energy, this confidence that was intoxicating. One evening, after Richard had fallen asleep in his recliner, as usual, I found myself wandering to the garden again. The stars were out, casting a soft glow over everything, and there he was, Lucas, sitting on the low stone wall, sketchpad in hand. He waved me over, and without thinking, I went. That night, something shifted. He showed me his sketches, these beautiful, raw images that seemed to capture more emotion than I'd felt in years. And when his hand brushed mine as he handed me the pad, I felt a spark, a real, undeniable spark. I don't know if it was the way he looked at me, like I was the only person in the world, or if it was the sheer thrill of doing something I shouldn't. But something deep inside me woke up. A hunger for more. For life. For feeling. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not proud of what came next. But I can't pretend it didn't happen. Lucas started finding excuses to linger longer at the fence. I started dressing a little nicer when I knew he'd be around. And slowly, our connection deepened. It wasn't some torrid affair, not at first. It was glances that lasted a little too long, touches that lingered, shared secrets whispered in the quiet of the night. And every time I looked into his eyes, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering between fear and exhilaration. I thought I had a grip on the situation, on myself, but life has a funny way of proving otherwise. The day it all started to unravel was a warm, lazy Sunday. I'd baked a batch of lemon tarts, a recipe my grandmother used to swear by, and thought it'd be a nice gesture to bring some over to the Thompson. I should have known better. Richard had gone to the golf course, like clockwork. Sundays were his sacred routine, a world apart from mine. I carried the plate over, balancing it carefully as I rang the doorbell. No answer. But their front door was slightly ajar, swinging softly in the breeze. I called out, "Hello? Anyone home?" Still nothing. The house was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's holding its breath. I stepped inside, hesitant but curious. Just leave the plate on the counter and go, I told myself. But my feet moved on their own, leading me deeper into the house. Then I saw him. Lucas was in the living room, sprawled out on the couch, a laptop on the coffee table in front of him, playing with his broom. I couldn't believe my eyes. I hesitated for a moment, watching him, but I didn't back down. I'd never watched anyone do this before, and it stirred up strange feelings in me. At first, he didn't hear me. When he finally noticed me, he started and said, "Rose," his voice a mixture of surprise and something else, something unsaid. I held up the plate awkwardly, feeling suddenly out of place. "I made these for your family," I said, my voice lighter than I felt. His face was filled with fear. "They're not home." "But..." "Rose, please don't tell anyone what you saw." I should have said, of course, I should have left. But instead I went over and sat down next to him and put the plate on the coffee table. I felt like I was hypnotized after what I had just seen. What happened next felt inevitable, like water finding its way through cracks in stone. At first, we talked about everything and nothing, to lighten the mood. I told him he could trust me, that it would remain a secret between us. Then, to lighten the mood, we talked about his art, the weather, the new cafe that had opened in the city center. But there was an undercurrent of tension behind everything, a tension that neither of us had touched on but that we both felt strongly. At some point, silence fell. Just as I was about to make a move to leave, he spoke. "You know what? I've never had anything with anyone before," he said. I sat back down. I guess our conversations had worked, he saw me as a safe haven. He looked sad. So I sat down next to him. I wanted to show him affection so he wouldn't be sad, but the bulge of his broom caught my eye. The words came out of my mouth involuntarily at that moment. "Lucas. I can help you if you want," I said. My hand was on the bulge. My touch lasted longer than it should have, and I looked up and met his eyes. They were standing still, searching, and in that moment I knew we were standing on the edge of something we couldn't turn back from. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe it was him. Maybe it was me. But suddenly, we were close, too close. His hand grazed my cheek, tentative but deliberate, and I froze, my heart pounding. "Rose," he murmured, his voice low, almost reverent. And just like that, the dam broke. The kiss was tentative at first, testing the waters. But when I didn't pull away, it deepened, becoming something more urgent, more consuming. My mind screamed at me to stop, to think of Richard, to think of the consequences. But my body didn't listen, lost in the heat of the moment. I stopped thinking about what to do. It had happened. About him. About how his touch made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. And deep down, I knew he was thinking it too. Then everything changed. I couldn't tear my eyes away from him. The sharp line of his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly as he focused, the shadows that played on his cheekbones, every detail etched itself into my mind like a painting I couldn't stop admiring. I shifted in my seat. "I'll show you how, but first go and lock the door," I said. He ran excitedly and locked the door. My cheeks were warm when he came to me. "Rose," he said, my name rolling off his tongue like a secret meant only for me. I ran my fingers over his lips to quiet him. I grabbed his arm and sat him down in front of me. I slowly opened the package and gave him the command. His touch was warm, grounding, yet electric. My pulse quickened as his fingers traced small, empty patterns on the package, a barely perceptible touch that sent shivers down my spine. "You're beautiful," he murmured. I know, those words were said to keep him from feeling embarrassed. Frankly, I didn't care. All I wanted was to relax. I held his head affectionately and quickly brought him closer to the package. His touch was firm but gentle. With each stroke, electricity would run from that point to my hair. After the vague sounds coming out of my mouth, he must have realized that he was doing something right, because he started to speed up. I started squeezing the pillow as if I was taking my revenge. The intensity of this feeling increased even more and finally turned into a big scream. I was shaking and Lucas got up quickly with the water spilling from the package. Without wasting time, I lay down on the couch randomly. I grabbed the broom and placed it in the center of the package. He tried some amateur and slow movements a few times, but I didn't have time for that. I was expecting more. I slowly touched him and commanded him to stop. After taking full control, I made all the movements. Back and forth, like I was swinging. We were enjoying it incredibly. Both of our temperatures were rising. The house started to get really hot. It took a long time for someone who had experience for the first time. I couldn't help but think about it at that moment, but I could feel that we were slowly coming to an end. Because his reactions had become more indecisive. He suddenly took the broom out of the package. I immediately turned towards him and we were level with the broom. He held the end of the broom with his hand and tried to get the contents out. His attempt failed. I agreed with him because that was what happened in my first experience. I immediately took action. When it passed my palate and went further, my stomach felt queasy. But I continued in order not to ruin everything. I held on as long as I could. At the end my eyes turned red and saliva was flowing from my mouth as if I was having a seizure. Luckily, that was enough. There was a huge vibration and an explosion. My face couldn't even be seen from the protein liquid. Now it was all over. Everyone was happy. He sat down on the bench tiredly. He was out of breath. I cleaned my face with the napkin on the coffee table. How was it? I asked as he got up and left. He just looked at me with a unique smile on his face. Will I see you again? He asked. We both more or less knew the answer to that. Yes, you'll see, I said and left the house.